There's so much about the work of my guest today that really is everything that this podcast is about. Resilience, curiosity, the importance of your physical environment, reinvention, collaborations, adaptability, learning from the past, from either successes or mistakes to, what could have been, what should have been, how to repurpose the past and how we shift ourselves in what's already, a volatile and fast changing world. And it's all with the aim of making the world a better place for us to to really live alongside each other and not at each other's throats. um this sort of stuff is right up my street anyway. And the latest LP of his band Public Service Broadcasting is called This New Noise. And just the fact that it's got a track on it called Cello Sings in Daventry means it gets 9 out of 10. Now 9 out of 10, what would you say? So it would have been Cello, 10 out of 10 if it was Cello Sings in Chorley, but I get it. Chorley's Winter Hill transmitter served mainly Granada TV, whereas Daventry, I think, was the beep. So rookie mistake, Winter Hill. Anyway, no, it's really a fabulous LP, and one that for me is another evolutionary stage for public service broadcasting. So Jay Willgoose Esquire, welcome to the show. Thanks very much for coming on, Jay.
Thanks, Giles. Cheers.
Great stuff. Yeah, so that's it. It's interesting that how you sort of remember things from childhood. So I remember that transmitter in just outside Chorley, where I was born, Winter Hill. It was almost like it was this landmark. Winter Hill was this big sort of hill where actually there was famously an airplane crash. I think a plane that was going from randomly from Isle of Man to Manchester crashed on Winter Hill in I think it was like the late 50s or something like that, in really bad weather, and it became sort of infamous as this as the site of this crash. But right alongside this sort of huge transmitter that was kind of serving the whole northwest region. Fascinating stuff for me anyway. If we take the BBC, for example, I mean, it's obviously got such a rich history and has taken a battering for for many years. But in terms of many aspects of like culture, sport, creative education, it's been so rich, enriching for us. And you're writing music for so many sort of historic events. The miners, for example, the race for space. I mean, what's your relationship with the BBC been like over the years?
Well, there's this, like most people in this country, I think there's probably several relationships with it. There's the personal one, which is having grown up with the BBC and having come to rely on it and having come to trust it,
Mm,
despite its kind of multiple slip ups on some levels.
mm,
So much of my childhood as a kind of as being a kid from the terrestrial television days was
mm.
provided to me by the BBC, and radio as well. And then there's the professional one as well, in that I wouldn't have a career, I wouldn't be in a band, a commercially successful band, without the BBC. Without having uploaded my music to the BBC introducing uploader and having it kind of played from there and encouraged me, and encouraged me to keep going, keep trying different things, and
Mm.
then from there getting played by Gideon Coe and Tom Robinson on Six Music, and really onwards and upwards from there. Without having been given those opportunities and without those paths,
Mm.
to exposure existing, there's no way we would be anywhere near where we are now.
There you are.
And it's the same with pretty much every band in a similar sphere to us. I think in the kind of indie/alternative, left of the mainstream type environment, Six Music is the reason we can do what we do for a living.
Yeah, I mean that's again, thinking about those sort of stations, and for me back in the day, John Peel was was so important for me, kind of finding out music, and I guess for for giving those new bands, from famously playing the Undertones twice in a row because he loved it so much. But it's those sort of people, and having those sort of channels, people like as you mentioned, Gideon Coe, having the either the freedom, the foresight, and the willingness to take a chance, I guess, on new artists. We would be so much culturally poorer without them.
Definitely. Absolutely.
Going back to it's interesting thinking about the BBC and those sort of thinking about your formative influences. Those sort of big events that happened in your childhood, or even people that you were sort of hanging out with. For the big events, you're seeing them often through the lens of TV. But what were the big things that you remember from childhood as to that you've carried through life with you?
There's news-based things. There's the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was when I was
Mm,
7. There's the
mm,
start of the Gulf War. I remember that very vividly when I was 9. Um, you know, Labour getting into power, I suppose, in 97.
mm,
Um, all those kind of pivotal moments of my kind of early years and adolescence. And then, sort of culturally, I suppose, not just the TV, um, kind of the TV coverage, but radio, yeah, so important for me. I think less John Peel for me, but I was of the age where,
mm.
Steve Lamacq and Joe Wiley were
Yeah.
hugely important to people of my age, and Radcliffe and Maconie. Sorry, not Radcliffe and Maconie. Mark Radcliffe and the boy Lard, as he was then, Mark
Yes,
Riley.
Mark Riley. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
their show and their subsequent kind of uh, move to sort of mainstream Radio One. All of that was, such a massive part of my childhood. I remember hearing Paranoid Android for the first time, and it was somebody had taped it off
Mm.
Steve Lamacq's Radio One show the day before, and just sitting in a classroom listening to it on headphones and thinking, "The hell is this?" In a good way. um, yeah, all of that kind of delivered by a service that we pay for, we own. That still is focused on, for all its failings, multiple failings, still is focused on, bettering the lives of the people in this country and the people who rely on it.
Mm,
And that's something that it can do and that it does do in a way that no private organization, I think, will ever
mm.
compete with, because it's not culturally, it's not commercially kind of viable, really.
Yeah.
Um, so nobody else is going to kind of step into that ground when the BBC goes, and it does feel like increasingly like when it goes, because
Mm.
it feels like an endangered species at the moment.
It does really, doesn't it? Yeah, I mean, which I agree. With all its for all the things that have gone wrong, the overall importance, the good stuff that it does, that it puts out there is incredible. Really, I think it is, and I think you're right about the sort of the public element of it as opposed to private. I think
Yeah,
that's really important. Really important.
well, that's the point I tried to make on stage and in the music with the
Mm,
proms piece was, if the BBC isn't here to finance the orchestra, to finance this kind of commission, to finance this kind of collaboration, and to put on a festival season like the proms, which is so affordable and accessible. How else are you going to get a ticket at the Albert Hall for £7.50 or whatever it is?
yeah,
Um, without the BBC doing that, who else does that? No one
yeah,
does that.
yeah.
It's absolutely vital to the fabric of the nation. And I just get so frustrated with people, using talking about the BBC to just illustrate their favourite bugbears
Mm,
with various scandals or various bits of coverage over the years. It's kind of like complaining about, one bad experience with the NHS or something and using it to tarnish the whole thing.
mm,
It's it's irrelevant. Your level of kind of individualism does not apply to a public institution on the scale and importance of the BBC. And I
mm,
think we all need to kind of remove ourselves from that equation as much as possible and recognise how beneficial it is to all of us as
mm,
a publicly owned institution, um, you know, run for the service of the public,
yeah.
and fight for it while we still have it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, I mean, if thinking about how, how it can bring, so many different aspects of, kind of culture. If we're just talking about music, it does that. And then you look at, something like theatre, which is hugely, sort of like live theatre shows, hugely expensive. So from the ability to sort of bring that to the masses, and the what theatre brings, we don't have that. But with music, with what the BBC can do, we do.
Yeah, and it's tremendously important. It's not just Six Music, but it's the role it provides as Radio 3 as well, and to a lesser extent Radio 1, and
Mm,
arguably to a much lesser extent Radio 2.
mm,
There are definitely areas where I think it overlaps with what commercial competitors would and are providing anyway, and those are the areas where you'd think is the strongest argument for some kind of narrowing of its kind of range of output would be. But then if it's going to be funded by the entire population or the entire TV owning population, it needs to represent the entire population
mm.
and cater for the entire population, whether that's classical music or alternative music or pop.
Yeah,
Um, it would be unfair to ask people to pay for it and not see themselves represented in some way by it.
absolutely. And also local radio as well, because
Yeah.
there was another show that I used to listen to, which is was on Radio Lancashire, called On the Wire, which was presented by Steve Barker. And it started probably around about 80. I'm going to say around about 83. He's still going now, but is now. I think it's only. I think Steve only sort of puts the shows on Mixcloud. So there was basically it became victim to kind of enforced funding cuts. But those kind of local radio shows that were they were highlighting national music, but a lot of local bands as well. Similar to what Peel was doing, and similar to what um, Mark Radcliffe and Mark Riley were doing, in subsequent years, and all those others that you mentioned. That they had that role to play. I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
I mean those sort of shows that you were listening to. I mean, would you call yourself a sort of curious kid
Um,
as you were
Probably
growing
not quite as curious as I should have been.
up?
But yeah, certainly. I'd like to think with my own personal antenna um, up and sort of receiving interesting signals from
Mm.
wherever they would come. Yeah, I would like to think that.
Did that sort of? I mean, getting into music as well. I mean, has that been important for you? I guess in the kind of the evolution of PSB.
Well, I mean, yeah, music's the after family is the love of my life really, and
Mm,
um, from an early age certainly, but then as a teenager, when the whole kind of world of music really exploded with the advent of Oasis and definitely maybe, and just the
yeah.
excitement of that moment.
Mm,
Um, and from then, pretty much every decision I've taken as a young adult or as an adult has been trying to stay as close to that world of music as possible.
mm,
If I can't actually be a musician myself, then what can I do to try and be as close to it as I can?
mm.
And you know, surround myself and immerse myself in that world and try and live in it as much as possible. So, yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned definitely maybe, which I agree. I mean the first time I heard Rock and Roll Star, just like that sort of first song was just like, wow, that's just an incredible piece of music. What significance does that record have for you?
Huge, it was the record that was kind of like a bomb going off in my head. As a
Mm,
teenager, it was the one that really lit the fuse
mm,
for that sort of slightly latent enthusiasm for music that I had at the time, but to kind of really bring everything to the front and make pretty
mm,
much my whole life be about music. It's really hard with Oasis because they became so stodgy and so boring and so slow.
mm.
I think they're the only band who, the more drugs they took, the slower they got. Um, yeah, if you listen to the "Be Here Now," I mean, God, it's like it's going to fall off a cliff or something. But when you listen to it, it's hard to kind of convey to people how exciting that first record was, how it felt like a kind of a new era dawning, and how just the one that did it for me was hearing "Bring It On Down" for the first time, and
Mm,
not many people kind of retrospective listeners to Oasis would probably know that track that well, but
Mm,
it's just so exciting. This the kind of scores of feedback, the drumming, the pick slide.
yeah.
It's just everything about it was just like, whoa, what is this? Um, and that from there it was no looking back.
Was it? I mean, was that? So I mean, that for example was a sort of catalyst for you to. I mean, did it influence you to sort of get involved in making music?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a NME cover from a few years back with Noel Gallagher on the cover, or maybe it wasn't NME, it was Music Magazine. The pull quote from it was, "I'm the reason you play the guitar," and I was like, "Yeah, to be honest, yeah, you are, or You're the reason I started playing the guitar, definitely." They were so important for a whole generation of musicians.
Mm,
For that first kind of blinding flash of definitely maybe, and into What's the Story.
mm.
Um, Things went pretty badly downhill after that, I think,
I agree.
um,
Yeah.
but yeah, they were enormously important. Um, they were, culturally defining massively.
What did your sort of very first forays into music? And how did that sort of make you feel?
Um, I mean, as a kid, me and my older brother, were in a band from sort of age 5 and 7, or what we called a band, in that we pressed the
Yeah,
demo button on the keyboard and wrote nonsense lyrics to it and played
brilliant.
absolute rubbish with it.
That's got to be
You
done.
know,
That's got to be done.
well, we did it, and I remember we discovered the liner notes to um, I think it was a Police record, Regatta de Blanc or something, and
Yeah.
we found the words to Message in a Bottle, and we thought, oh, nobody's going to know this song. We can just take these words and use them. No one will have ever heard that. So I think we took those and put them over a terrible, terrible, MIDI party. Um, and I suppose my kind of history of plundering has has not looked back since then. A bit more legitimate these days, but that was probably the first instance of it.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I mean, did that sort of carry on through sort of the school years?
Mucking around with keyboards, yeah,
Mm,
and coming up with melodies and stuff. I think melodically, I always had a reasonably strong ear
mm,
for melody. I think I was weak in all sorts of other areas, and probably still am. But that kind of being able to hear something before you've actually written it, and being able to kind of put that into music. Um, Even in the early days, I remember being able to do that, and the kind of feeling that gives you, and the thrill of hearing it back as well. I
mm.
think what you have to be very careful of is not confusing the thrill of hearing it back with, um, you know, just because you are hearing it back doesn't mean it was any good. Uh, you have to kind of put that to one side and actually try and look at it with a more self-critical eye. And I've definitely got a lot better at that in the years, thankfully. But yeah, that didn't really stop. It just changed, and as soon as Oasis came along, the focus moved away from Yamaha 50 quid keyboards and moved to guitars and
Mm,
feedback and distortion
right.
and all that kind of stuff, and playing in a band with schoolmates and my brother again, and then going to university and playing in bands there, and playing in bands after university, and just all those experiences really, leading into what eventually was meant to be just a bit of fun when I started doing this, having given up any kind of real ambition to be a musician. So yeah, it was a funny old route to get to where we are.
Did I mean, were you sort of encouraged in this path?
Um, yeah, I'd say. I mean, I was encouraged um, by the feeling that I got from it personally.
Mm,
I was encouraged by my parents. I
mm,
was lucky to have parents um, who were supportive and didn't say like, "Oh, stop doing that and do something useful instead." They were used to my kind of creative urges, I suppose. No matter what we did as kids,
mm,
I think there was always an attempt to kind of take it and mold it. Whether that was making our own levels for computer games and kind of rudimentary game designers and that kind of stuff, and making our, I remember making my first sort of very rudimentary HTML websites and stuff. It
mm.
was always kind of take these sources of creative inspiration and then actually don't just kind of, you know, play them or listen to them passively, but actually take them and kind of, try and use it as your own form of creative inspiration. So they were used to that, and they're very supportive of that. And they bought us cheap, but they did buy us electric guitars for Christmas,
That's
which a lot of
amazing.
families wouldn't have been able to do,
Yeah.
wouldn't have put up with that kind of racket either. Um, you know, just really, really fortunate in all sorts of ways, really, with the way that was brought up. But yeah, yeah, um, very
That-
much so. Support from all quarters, really.
and that was so your brother as well was kind of like on the same kind of path as you, and you obviously sort of played in the same band. I mean, I'm an only child as well. I mean, in a way, I wish I'd had parents that were as supportive, to you know allow me to go down the path that I wanted. And I think because I was an only child, I always felt like the spotlight was on me a little bit, and like I was like the one, and yeah, there was certainly, and it's interesting how it sort of passes through generations. Like my dad was very much around. He'd had a very insecure childhood, and as a result, he became sort of self-educated and ended up, he became a chartered mechanical engineer. But for him, finding a good job, that kind of stuff was something that was important to him, and he sort of passed that on to me. And I think at the expense of having, those musical, and I did have musical strengths, that those suffered a little bit. I think so. I think what you had is, that support is really really valuable especially when you're a kid.
Yeah, very lucky on that front.
Yeah. So then the kind of the bands and the sort of scenes that you started, kind of hanging out in the sort of the teenagers when you're at school and stuff like that. I mean, what sort of influence were they having on you as you were getting older?
Well, it's just the excitement of going to gigs. They didn't even really have to be very good because teenagers aren't the most discerning audience in terms of quality because they haven't experienced enough to really be. They can be the judge of whether they think something's good or not, but they don't have the kind of breadth of experience to know when it's something truly kind of life changing. But
Mm,
I remember going to all kinds of gigs like Cast and Ash and Sleeper and Long
mm,
Pigs and
mm,
all sorts of stuff. Cooler Shaker even before they kind of self-immolated and
yeah.
um, you know all sorts of stuff like that. And then the kind of the more interesting ones musically were the ones who kind of took me up and away from that whole world, like Radiohead and the Manics as well, and
Yeah.
took me into a different world of playing the guitar as well. A much more kind of textured way of using the guitar as an instrument, certainly in terms of Radiohead,
Mm,
definitely.
yeah. I mean, those sort of bands, Radiohead especially, sort of very, extremely, kind of innovative and, groundbreaking in lots of ways. As were the Manics. Manics. I saw them in Shepherd's Bush. I think the first time I saw them was about 2006, maybe. I think it was around about that time, which was a kind of great show. And did you find that your influences were changing? As you were going to sort of see more gigs, were you quite open minded in terms of what you liked or what you were prepared to go see?
Um, I think at school, no, because I was still I was probably one of the last generations where you know everything was a bit more fragmented and was
Mm,
your kind of narrow choice of genre defined you a lot more.
mm,
I think that seems to be less and less the case with young people these days. I think they like a bit of everything, which
mm,
is a much more healthy way to be.
yeah,
Um, and is one of the kind of strongest arguments I think in favor of kind of the freedom of digital digital music,
mm,
certainly from the point of view of the listener. Um, yeah, you can't listen to a record like OK Computer and not have your music kind of tastes and your appetite and your understanding of what music can be and where it can take you. You can't, as a 15-year-old, listen to that and not be
mm,
changed. I think not be changed profoundly. And then again, kid A, aged 18, hearing that and just a whole new way of experiencing an album, really, and a whole new understanding of sounds and instruments as textures as much as anything else.
yeah.
Um, yeah, life changing stuff, definitely.
I think the what you mentioned there about the kind of crossover, I guess, of sort of styles, and I do have this bit of a sort of bugbear of how the music is compartmentalized into sort of genres that because it almost sort of feels redundant, and I think quite rightly. There's so much crossover of styles and different influences coming into a lot more artists' work these days, and I think that's really helpful.
I would say so. Yeah, from my own personal experience, I would say so. Definitely.
I think of it. I think of a band like A Certain Ratio, been going since what 79, I guess, and I've always always had those sort of different influences coming in, but even more so now, and have um probably doing the best stuff that they've been doing, and I think that just having that again, that sort of mindset, that sort of open mind to sort of bring in different sorts of things, I think is really really powerful, and there's many more doing it these days. Let's talk maybe a little bit about about collaborations and other people that you sort of bring in. So obviously the big one at the moment is for this new noise is Jules Buckley for um on the record. I mean, for you, what have those sort of collaborations given you?
Well, Jules is quite a different one in terms of the people that we've worked with in the past,
Mm,
because his role, I suppose, was as a kind of an interlocutor really between our world of alternative pop or whatever you want to call it, alternative
yeah.
indie, and classical music, and kind of making sure both sides of that equation understood each other and could play with a sense of common purpose.
Mm,
And he was great at that. He was great at making sure the orchestra understood what we tried to do with our writing and our orchestrations. And he was also great at kind of relating to us some of the things that we might have been trying to do that were just a bit ambitious or that might work kind of in the sampling world, but wouldn't really work with a real orchestra and real players
mm,
because they're just not used to playing in a certain way with a certain kind of um, it's just not going to sound the way that we kind of envisaged in our demos or something. So
mm.
he was a kind of a bridge, really, in a way, between those two worlds, and he did it. He did it fantastically, I think. Um, yeah, I don't really, I can't begin to comprehend the level at which somebody like that operates, but it's many, many stratospheres above mine musically, that's for sure.
I mean, I guess that I mean, not talking about Jules specifically, but kind of collaborations bring in a whole other sort of element of, I guess, sort of personality types. Perhaps people that you don't know. You're kind of bringing them in, and then there's a how do you then work together? That whole kind of ethos. It's not an easy thing to do, I guess.
Well, he made it seem easy,
Mm,
um, which I think was one of his biggest strengths.
yeah.
And it's not an easy thing to do. Certainly, yeah, it's an extraordinary command of all kinds of different aspects of music. And I
Mm,
think you really see that with the stuff that he does with like the Innovisions prom that he did, and the Northern Soul one as well.
yeah.
Um, it's really kind of genre bending stuff, and he's a pioneer in that sense, really.
Because I guess I mean, for him, I mean, he's got the whole orchestra. I mean, how many members in the LSO as well? Must be
Oh, with the BBC, yes,
yeah. Sorry, the BBC.
symphony
Sorry,
orchestra. So it was 86, I think we had on stage there, or
86.
including the 4 or 6 off stage we had. Yeah, we had off stage brass for the end of one piece.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's a lot of people. It's a lot
that's
of people to wrangle.
yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean that's what I think. I think with the, obviously, with my kind of mindset lens on, how use your I guess a lot of it is sort of emotional intelligence, and how you manage that number of people and sort of bring them together with a sort of specific vision of what you're trying to achieve as well. I mean, that's no mean feat doing all that.
Well, I think it helps, the hierarchy within an orchestra and the highly kind of institutionalized and highly organized way in which they work, because they have to. Each section has a leader, and the leader's job is to kind of, translate the conductor's instructions, and also, to follow the orchestra's leader as well, the leader of the first violins. There's all these kind of different relationships within the orchestra. It's a really fascinating thing to just watch and be part of. Is this organism of the orchestra in front of you, and how it responds to these things, how it responds to certain challenges and certain novelties. Because it's kind of an institution within an institution. They're not necessarily the most kind of sort of immediately flexible kind of group of people, I suppose, because they're used to doing things in a certain way, and the second you sort of take them out of that, you're into uncharted territory, and you feel that sense of unease and unfamiliarity kind of spread amongst them quite quickly. But that's where Jules, and to a lesser extent our roles, come in to sort of assure them and assuage them that we are capable-ish and know what we're doing, and it's being done for a purpose. But yeah, there were a few moments where it was a little bit uncertain that we were going to get what we needed, just because of what we were asking them to do, like leaving the stage section by section at the end. There was a bit of resistance to that from orchestra management, just from a kind of worrying that people were going to trip up and kill themselves kind of perspective. Wow. But we managed to surmount that, thankfully.
How do you personally sort of deal with uncertainty in your life?
Historically, not very well, but I think I've had to become much better at it, because I'm essentially a freelance freelance worker in extremely volatile and extraordinarily competitive industry.
Yeah.
So many people would like to be doing this job. I'm lucky enough to be one of them actually doing it, but in order to stay doing that, you really have to, you have to recognize what a privilege that is, but you also have to put the effort in to kind of stay at the level you'd like to stay at. It's it never feels like you can kind of take your foot off the pedal or relax. You have to be kind of constantly on the edge, and dealing with that level of uncertainty. I've got better at it, but it's not the easiest thing to do, definitely.
I mean, without wanting to sort of get too personal into it, but are there certain things that you have had to learn to live, I guess, to live with, and certain things that you can do to help you with that?
Yeah, just financial precariousness, I suppose. Looking ahead at the start of this year, it was like, well, we're not doing many gigs. We haven't really got much in the way of advances coming in terms of records. Where's the money coming from? And my wife had just, we had our second child was 6 months old, so my wife wasn't working, and I'd taken on the studios that I'm talking to you from.
Yeah.
So I had all kinds of new overheads to deal with, and it was quite a stressful kind of set of circumstances to be getting on with. But the way to get through that, like with the other kind of challenges I've faced in life, is just to kind of get on with it, really, and put one foot in front of the other and take things one step at a time. And there's been a bit more resourcefulness in terms of where money could come from this year, without kind of compromising the way that I like to do things, and without compromising the band's integrity, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just had to be a bit of kind of graft, I suppose. But yeah, financial precariousness is not a nice thing to deal with for anybody.
Yeah.
I think the way that that's just kind of implicit and taken as read in the freelance world in general is it's a burden that kind of goes with that way of working. It's probably one of the reasons why freelancers work so hard and work so many hours of the day, is because you don't necessarily know where the next jobs are coming in.
Is there? Yeah, I totally hear you with that. I mean, is there a strong sense of self-belief for you in what, or has there been in what you're doing, that's in a way kind of like reliant on your instinct?
I think that there probably is a strong self-belief lurking very far under the surface, marked by a lot of self-doubt and a lot of self-incrimination and a lot of kind of anxiety. But there must, I think I am actually quite resilient underneath all of that.
Yeah.
Because you have to be.
Yeah.
You can't you just don't have a choice, especially making anything creative in the modern era, and how instant the feedback is, and how
It's
people can
true.
really, if they want to find you to be horrible to you, they can, and they
Mm,
will. Um, you do need to have a degree of resilience. I wish you didn't, because
mm,
actually the people who are most sensitive to the world around them and the best at kind of interpreting that world in ways that are emotionally affecting and emotionally resonant with other people are the people who are probably least best placed to be exposed to that kind of brutality. But but at the
I
same
com-
time, it does go with the territory a bit.
I completely agree with you on that. I really do. I can totally empathise that that with that feeling. I mean, I think that yeah, the amount of time that and energy that we must need to spend on resilience, is quite is quite tough. It's quite shocking. I think the extent to which resilience is has to be used in our lives because of this sort of insecurity, whether that be kind of creative, financial, or whatever. Um, the reaction that you get. I mean, I mean, one thing that I suffered from chronically was kind of worrying about what other people think, and almost to the extent that becomes debilitating. And I've had to work a lot at that, to be confident. I mean, even starting this podcast, I had to be dragged into it. It's like, no, nobody's going to want to listen to me, and all that sort of stuff. It's like, why would anybody want to listen to me? Um, but what you say about that's yourself, lurking somewhere underneath, that's really kind of driving you. I think is a really good point, that it is there somewhere, needs to have that valve to come out almost.
Yeah, and I think it's probably something that that kind of that persistence and that determination is something that's stood me in reasonably good stead
Mm,
compared to my musical peers. The vast majority of musicians I know are far more skilled than me musically, and from a technical and also from a kind of songwriting perspective, probably. But uh, either their kind of mastery of everything means that they lack the focus that a
mm,
more narrow set of skills kind of points you down that road, or they just don't have that kind of persistence, I suppose.
yeah,
I know, I think that's the thing that's kind of stood me in the best stead, apart from anything else, is just determination and being able to see
determination.
things through. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think again that is a very very strong characteristic to have. Very important, sort of persistence through, because there are so many obstacles in our world, that are put in front of us, that um you know and I think with the complexity now, that having the persistence to sort of get through all those different obstacles that we maybe didn't face 15 years ago, you need a lot of that. So I think, yeah, that's really really important point, I think.
Hmm.
With your with your ideas, sort of, let's say, kind of writing music. If it's let's assume, maybe I shouldn't assume, but if there's such a situation where you're not happy with an idea that you've come out with, you have to sort of go back to you feel like you have to go back to the drawing board with that idea. How do you deal with those sort of situations?
It's just happened recently, really. I'm demoing the next record, and I thought I had a good one. I'd kind of
Mm,
recorded it at the time of writing, being like, oh yeah, that'll be a good one, and went through the early stage of demoing, got wrapped up in the kind of minutiae of it, really, and then after about a week of working on it, just came into the studio one day, listened to it, and was like, I don't like this. um, so just binned it, and trust that instinct that it's not doing it for me. So why the heck is it going to do it for anyone else?
mm,
And started working on something else, which is a much more fruitful, has been a much more fruitful avenue to tackle a similar idea with, really. Um, and I think just not being too kind of wedded to your preconceived ideas, and um, being willing to listen to stuff, and being
mm,
open to the fact that it's going to change as you work on it, because you know, nothing I think is the same in the moment of kind of conception. It's nothing is the
Mm,
same as what actually comes out the other end of that process. So I think you just need to be able to kind of take that resilience in a different kind of form,
mm.
and be able to apply it to your own work and listen to it relatively objectively as well as subjectively, and just think, nah, it's not doing it for me. I'm going to put this one in the bin, and then don't be too hard on yourself in the process. It's just one of the things you have to go through those moments when you're making anything.
I think that's a really good point. That's something I think that I've struggled with a little bit. Maybe holding on to things a little bit too long. Things that you become a little bit too attached to them, become precious. So I think what you say there about not doing that, and it's almost like that. I think sometimes with this, again, this sort of mindset thing about not being wedded to outcomes. We're trying to be, not have too harder goals that you're sort of setting. Where you're setting yourself up for failure. You think, okay, well, I need to get this, and then it doesn't happen, and it's disappointment.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the fear of having something taken away from you is
Yeah.
you can let that poison your approach to things in different ways in terms of not wanting to expose yourself to any of that kind of risk or heartache. But
Mm.
yeah, it's a tricky balance.
Would you call yourself a risk taker? And have you felt
Um,
your tolerance for risk sort of changing over the years?
I think you have to be a risk taker to be in any kind of creative industry. I think I'm greatly helped in that. Um, in terms of my background, in terms of the fact, I had a very supportive and sort of comfortable middle class upbringing in South London.
Mm,
Um, I have a certain amount of safety net that other people faced with the same choice that I was faced with in the early days of having to quit my job and really make a go of it.
mm,
I knew things could never get so bad that I'd be like on the street or something.
mm,
That just wouldn't happen because I still had parental support. I
mm,
still had like family networks and friend networks around me, and some people in that position don't have that. So I don't want to paint myself as some kind of maverick risk taker when I'm all too aware of the kind of the privileges that I've enjoyed throughout my life and
yeah.
how they've enabled me to take some of those risks. But
Mm,
yeah, I think you do have to have a certain boldness to you to make any kind of headway in any kind of creative industry.
yeah.
So there must be an element of that to how we've managed to have some level of success in this group.
Mm. And if through I totally hear you with that. Through taking some risks, you make a decision and something doesn't work out. Um, how do you? I'm going to say, how do you sort of learn from those mistakes, and then does that give rise to other um, fears of making the same mistakes, or do you kind of say, okay, well, I just need to make sure that I don't do that again?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I don't have any huge regrets in terms of what we've done or the way we've done things in the past.
Mm,
There's not things that I would change particularly in how we've done them. Um, I don't think. I think there's been certain kind of ways of learning to deal with having a voice that a small group of people pay attention to, and the
yeah.
responsibility of using that, and the responsibility of not getting caught up and carried away with that.
Mm,
But musically, I don't necessarily know if I've got any great insight into that because
mm,
um, I think for better or worse, what we've done is what we've done, and I'm still confident in defending what we've done and how we've done it.
yeah.
And yeah, I wouldn't really want to go backwards at any point. I don't think.
No, it's amazing. Yeah. So what's coming next, Jay?
Well, hopefully a new record. I'm kind of maybe a quarter of the way through demos for it,
Mm,
and it's one of these things where all sorts of things are still up in the air. I have an idea of what I'm writing and the purpose of why I'm writing and what I'm writing about,
yeah.
and I have an idea of how I'm going to get there. But the kind of filling in the blanks and working out how certain things are going to be achieved, how certain bits of archive are going to be acquired or we created are still very much huge question marks, and it's
Mm,
all accompanied by quite real time pressures and deadlines, which is
mm,
you know uh, is something to keep you awake at night. So yeah, that's what's next really is working on the next record and trying to get it ready for the ideal date to get it ready by, and if it's not ready for then having the bravery to just say it's not ready and push it back,
mm.
and deal with the repercussions of that, on an industry and a kind of professional level. But yeah, I think just working really, working on the next thing, and
Living with
trying to
liminality.
keep trying to
Yeah.
keep the wheels on, like
Yeah.
anybody in this. It's not an easy way to make a living music. We're very fortunate, very, very fortunate that we've found a way to do it, and that we've got such a supportive fan base. But
Mm.
you can't take anything for granted, so we're trying not to.
Well, full power to you, Jane. Best of luck with it. I think so far your work has been amazing, and I'm sure there's more great stuff to come.
That's very kind. Thank you.